Hello there, this review is on my latest book, The Roman King Arthur, Lucius Artorius Castus by Pen and Sword Publishers. It is my favourite one so far. It's my favourite to research and write, and obviously I hope you like it as well. It's quite a compact little book, and it's based on the theories behind the 2004 film King Arthur, starring Clive, Owen and Keira Knightley. Very good film, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The question is, do the theories behind that film stand up to any scrutiny? And this book decides that the answer is definitely no. It dismantles that theory completely, I think quite successfully. It starts off with the inscriptions of Lucius Artorius Castus, who we know is an historical figure. He was a Roman officer in the late 2nd or early 3rd century. So it goes through the inscriptions and some of the problems with that inscription and the debates around some of the words, of which there are many. And once it's leaves aside the issues at hand, it then moves on to the theory of the legend of King Arthur and how it evolved throughout the centuries. So it emerged the first attested mention is the 9th century in the Historia Britonum in the Welsh source, and then we have Geoffrey of Monmouth's very tall tale in the 12th century, and then that inspired a wealth of books, mainly like French romances. We do have a slightly darker traditional Welsh tradition, where he's a more sort of dark and perhaps mythical figure, which may be earlier, may predate Geoffrey of Monmouth, but unfortunately the manuscripts are all post Geoffrey of Monmouth, so we can't be sure whether they've been corrupted or not. But we do have these two kind of traditions side by side, one a sort of chivalrous medieval knight type figure, and the other one a much darker character from the Welsh legends. But both traditions appeared in the Middle Ages, many hundreds of years after any historical Arthur would have lived. So we don't really know, or can't really be sure. But if he was historical, all the sources do point to the same time frame, which is the late 5th and early 6th century. Okay, so leaving that aside, we then move back to the 2nd century and the arrival of the Sarmatians, and we go through the history behind that and why they came, why they were sent. At least we don't know how many got here, if any at all, and we don't know what they did when they got here. Very likely some did. We do have some references to the Sarmatians. One at Ribchester, near Diva, near Chester, would have probably been attached to the 20th Legion as an auxiliary. At least one unit of 500, as that fort only holds 500. So we do know Sarmatians got here, but when we look at their legends, very, very little you could point to that has any similarity to the later Arthurian legends. And in fact, the legends that are cited are actually mostly the Nark sagas, which were only written down in the 19th century. They have nothing to do with Sarmatians at all. But even if they did, out of the many dozens of tall tales, there's only a couple that have any reference at all that have anything to do with anything in Arthurian legend. One involves a sword. Well, swords are pretty ubiquitous everywhere, and when you delve down into it, there really is no comparison. And the other one is a bowl, which some link to a cauldron or even a holy grail. And again, once you look at it, you look at the legends, there really is nothing there at all. So the first few chapters dismantle any link at all between Lucius Artorius Castus and Sarmatians, and between both of them and later Arthurian tradition. So we're going to leave that aside. We go back to Lucius Artorius Castus, and we look at the evidence and try and give a reasonable time frame. And there I try and do an alternative one to the one in Nick Himes' excellent book, The Legend of King Arthur, or The Making of the Legend, where he firmly places him in Britain in the 160s, and then leading some vexallations of the legions to Armenia in the Armenian campaign of 163. So I try and give an alternative time frame to that. So at least hopefully I show that it's quite possible to have a Severan period, Lucius Artorius Castus. So once we've gone through his career, laid it out, what it would have looked like, we then can go back to the film, the narrative in the film, and we go back to Cerdic and the Saxons and the Battle of Badon, which the film places in the north, and I think most people are familiar with the history will tell you that even if Cerdic was a historical figure, and that's debatable as well, but the earliest Saxon settlement or Germanic material culture and settlements were in the south, and Baden generally is thought to be in the south, in the Wessex area. It's mentioned by Gildas, who seems to be writing in that area. Everything he alludes to is in that area. Vortigern and Ambrosius and all the characters that are mentioned in some of the literature, again, all of whom are usually debatable, they all seem to be in the Wessex area or the south of Britain. So it does seem to be Baden is more likely in the south. So the film has it up by Hadrian's Wall, and they have Cerdic and the Saxons landing north of Hadrian's Wall and marching south, which is very unlikely. So the chapter goes through the actual history and where the earliest settlements were, where the first petty kingdoms emerged, which again are in the south. Kent was probably the first one, and then the first Bretwalda. B doesn't actually call him a Bretwalda, just says Hold Imperium, south of the Humber. But that seems to be Ella in Sussex. So everything points to the south for the earliest settlements, and the earliest, well, certainly in the 5th century, all the material culture would have been, if you imagine a line from, say, Middlesbrough down to Southampton, everything was south and east of that. And there's no evidence for any Germanic settlement north of Hadrian's Wall. But leaving that aside, we then move on to the last one of the penultimate chapters about King Arthur himself. And we try and say, if he, on the assumption he was an historical figure, which obviously is a huge assumption, what sort of person he was, we try and put him in the political and cultural context of the time. An earlier Arthur would have been in a world of perhaps surviving Roman institutions, albeit a fragmenting political, provincial situation. A much later Arthur would have been in a time of petty warlords and emerging petty kingdoms, and might have been a more localised character. I think Arthur was somewhere in the middle, right on the cusp of that, so it's very hard to tell whether he was sort of like Ambrosius Aurelianus is described as the last Roman trying to hold together some sort of provincial structure, or he was an Arthur of the Welsh traditions, which is sort of more of a sort of petty warlord, petty king type figure. But anyway, the sources, there is some consensus, and there is some consensus even in the or very late and debatable genealogies. So they don't actually make him a king of any particular early kingdom. So there is quite a bit we can say. So hopefully I can show that it is at least possible for there to have been a historical Arthur. And then we finish off by concluding that the Artorius Castus, obviously we know he was an historical figure, but he's firmly in the late 2nd or early 3rd century, and there is no link between him and the later Arthurian legend. There's no link between the Sarmatians and the later Arthurian legend as well. And an historical Arthur would have been in the late 5th or early 6th century. And a film on any one of them three things would have been quite interesting. A film on a 2nd or 3rd century Roman officer and his career across the empire, a film on Sarmatians coming to northern Britain, or a film on a 5th or 6th century war leader, or even king. All of them things would be quite interesting. Really no need to combine them. And the theory behind the 2004 film I conclude as a modern myth. And I don't think there's anything in it at all. There's nothing to support it, and there's quite a lot to enable us to dismantle it, I hope quite successfully. So I hope you like the book. It's quite an easy read, I think, and I'll put a link in the blurb below. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.